His hand struck my daughter before I even understood the sound. Sharp, echoing against the dining room's polished table, the overhead light trembling in its glass fixture as if it couldn't bear witness. I remember the metallic taste in my mouth, the way the air tightened around us, the way time seemed to split cleanly in two. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because moments like this happen behind far too many closed doors. I watched the shock drain from Hannah's face, replaced by something far deeper, a grief carved from years I hadn't yet uncovered. And as her mother-in-law's approving silence seeped through the room like a cold draft, I felt every instinct in me ignite at once. That was the moment everything started to unravel. The moment Mark's hand struck Hannah across the face, the entire dining room seemed to freeze. I remember the soft glow of the chandelier above us, warm and steady, as if it had no idea it was illuminating the worst moment of my life. The silverware barely rattled, the air barely shifted. Yet something inside me broke open with a force I could feel in my bones. I had spent more than half my life fighting for women in courtrooms across Tacoma. But nothing prepared me for watching my own daughter absorb a blow she never should have faced. For a split second, I felt myself split in two. One part of me surged forward with a mother's instinct, every cell screaming to protect her. The other part went silent and razor-sharp, the attorney in me cataloging every detail, the angle of his arm, the shock in her eyes, the way she tried to steady herself without making a sound. And then came the moment that turned horror into something darker. His mother, Loretta, sat back in her chair with the kind of pleased stillness that made my skin crawl. I could almost feel her approval settling over the table like a heavy curtain. In that terrifying quiet, I realized something with a clarity that hurt. After decades of defending strangers, the woman who needed my strength, my voice, my experience the most, was my own daughter. And that truth is what pulled me into the long, painful look back at how she ever ended up here in the first place. Hannah has always been the kind of person who carried light with her wherever she went. Even as a child, she moved through the world with a curiosity that felt limitless. I used to watch her take apart little radios with her father, her brow furrowed in that determined way she had. And I knew she would grow into a woman who shaped her own life. And she did. She built a career she loved, made decisions confidently, and stood on her own 2 feet long before she ever imagined building a family of her own. I was proud of her independence, proud of the steadiness in her spirit. When she introduced Mark, I remember feeling relieved. He seemed attentive, polished, and gentle in all the right ways. There was a warmth about him that made it easy to believe my daughter had chosen well. At the time, I mistook his watchfulness for admiration, his quietness for humility. It's strange how differently those same qualities look when you know where the story goes. The first shifts were barely visible. Little things. He encouraged her to rest more, to let him handle small decisions, to rely on him. I saw her adjusting her schedule to fit his preferences, pulling back on the hobbies that used to fill her with joy. I convinced myself it was normal newlywed compromise, but now, when I look back, I can see how those small accommodations began carving space inside her where doubt could take root. I should have asked more questions. I should have trusted the uneasy feeling I kept pushing aside. By the time I realized that her confidence was slowly being shaped into something quieter, something smaller, it was already happening. And Mark wasn't the only influence changing the rhythm of her life. Loretta Ellison entered their marriage the way a draft slips through an old window, soft at first, almost unnoticed. She carried herself with a gracious smile, the kind that made you feel ungrateful for questioning it. In the beginning, she framed every intrusion as help. She would stop by unannounced with groceries, reorganize their kitchen because she thought it made things easier, or offer advice about their routines as if she knew their lives better than they did. I remember telling myself it was harmless, that some mothers simply struggled to let go. But over time, her presence shifted from supportive to supervisory. She started commenting on the way Hannah dressed for work or how she arranged her schedule. She encouraged Mark to make decisions without consulting my daughter, insisting it was a man's responsibility to lead. I watched Hannah shrink a little whenever Loretta spoke, as if she were trying to make her discomfort small enough to ignore. I could see the tension living behind her eyes, even when she forced a polite smile. What unsettled me most was the way Loretta's influence wrapped itself around Mark. He grew more rigid, more certain that he knew what was best. And Hannah, caught between trying to honor their marriage and protect her own sense of self, struggled to name what was happening. I recognized the pattern long before I wanted to admit it. Control disguised as care. I felt the shift tightening around them, a quiet storm forming, and soon it would break open in a way none of us could pretend away. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into their dining room. The air felt too still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Hannah's smile looked pinned in place, and Mark's jaw was set in a way I had learned to distrust. Loretta hovered nearby, offering little remarks that landed like tiny blows, each one aimed at my daughter's confidence. I tried to settle myself, but every sound felt amplified. The clink of silverware, the scrape of chairs, the quiet tremor in Hannah's breathing. The pressure built slowly, the way storms do when the sky darkens without warning. Loretta corrected Hannah about how she served the food, how she folded napkins, how she carried herself. I watched my daughter shrink in real time, trying to stay composed. Then it happened. A single drop of water slipped from the edge of a glass and hit the table. Such a small, insignificant thing. But in that charged room, it felt like a spark landing on dry brush. Mark's hand moved before I could process it. One strike, then another, then a third, each one sharper, louder, more violent than the last. My body went cold as I watched Hannah's face twist in shock and pain. And in the corner of my eye, I saw Loretta's expression tighten, not in horror, but in satisfaction, as if order had been restored. In that instant, the split inside me vanished. Mother and attorney became one. I knew I had to get my daughter out of that house, and nothing was going to stop me. I moved on instinct, steady and controlled, the way I had done in every emergency of my career. While Hannah sat frozen in shock, I made the call, my voice calm even as my heart thundered. The officers arrived quickly. Mark's anger shifted into denial, and Loretta tried to defend him, but neither of them had any power once the situation was laid bare. Watching them be escorted out of that house felt unreal, as if the night had split into a before and an after. I gathered Hannah's things with quiet efficiency, guiding her out the door like I had when she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. She barely spoke, her breath shallow, her eyes distant. The drive home was silent, except for the soft sound of her trying to hold herself together. When we reached her old room, Something inside her broke open. She folded into me with a grief so deep it seemed to come from years she had never named. I held her, letting her shake and cry, grateful that at least for this moment, she was safe. As she finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, I sat beside her, knowing the real story was still waiting to be told. Hannah told me the truth in pieces, as if each word cost her something she wasn't sure she could spare. She sat on the edge of her childhood bed, hands trembling, eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. I could feel her hesitation, the way survivors often hover at the edge of their own memories, afraid that speaking them aloud will make them real again. When she finally began, her voice carried the weight of years she had kept buried. She told me the manipulation began on their honeymoon. Little comments about how she laughed too loudly or drew too much attention. Accusations that seemed absurd, but were delivered with such certainty they made her doubt her own instincts. She said she apologized constantly, even when she had no idea what she was apologizing for. Over time, his criticism turned inward, becoming the voice she heard whenever she questioned herself. As she unraveled the timeline, I felt my chest tighten. Each moment she described was a rung on the ladder that led her into fear. Loretta's influence only deepened it. Whenever Hannah tried to stand up for herself, Loretta framed it as disrespect, insisting that good wives learn to adapt. My daughter said she started believing that if she could just be a little quieter, a little more accommodating, the tension would ease. Instead, she disappeared piece by piece. Listening to her, I saw how trauma bonds root themselves in tiny compromises, how guilt becomes the glue that keeps someone trapped. I held her hand as she cried, wishing I could pull her back through time and shield her from every moment she endured. But the world outside that room was already shifting. Mark was not done, and soon, his attempts to regain control would begin. The calls started before the sun came up, all from numbers Hannah didn't recognize. At first she ignored them, but the voicemails came anyway, each one carrying a different version of the man she had just escaped. One was filled with trembling emotion, painting himself as a devastated husband who couldn't understand why she had abandoned him. Another shifted into self-pity, suggesting he had been pushed to the edge and needed her to help him heal. Then came the sharp turn, the familiar accusation that she had overreacted, that she always made things bigger than they were. I watched her shoulders fold in as she scrolled through the messages, each one tugging at a different wound he knew exactly how to reach. By noon, the tone had changed again. He claimed he was ready to take responsibility, insisting he finally saw the harm he had caused. But even in that supposed accountability, he twisted the blame back toward her, implying that if she had communicated better, he wouldn't have lost control. I recognized the pattern immediately. Manipulators cycle through whatever mask gets them closest to power. Hannah, though, was still raw, still trying to untangle what belonged to her and what had been planted in her mind. I sat beside her, quietly naming the tactics as they appeared. Love bombing, guilt, fear, projection. Each label helped her breathe a little steadier. But the real blow came that evening, a lawsuit delivered to our door, a $2 million defamation claim, paired with an attempt to suspend the temporary restraining order. Hannah broke down, convinced he had already won. I held her hands and told her what I knew to be true. This wasn't strength. It was desperation. And in that moment, something shifted. The fear began to harden into resolve. It was time for us to fight back. In the days that followed the lawsuit, something steadier began to rise in both of us. I shifted into the part of myself that had carried countless women through battles like this. I gathered every message, every voicemail, every documented incident. I reached out to colleagues I trusted, people who understood the patterns of coercive control and the way abusers use the legal system as another weapon. Laying out the pieces gave me clarity, and that clarity created room for strength. Hannah moved more slowly, but she moved. One afternoon, she wandered into the backyard and stood by the herb garden her father planted years ago. I watched her run her hand over the rosemary, lingering as if she were trying to remember who she had been before fear rearranged her. She told me she felt ashamed, as if staying so long meant she had failed herself. I reminded her that what she carried was trauma, not weakness, and that healing begins the moment truth is spoken. She closed her eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of basil and mint, and I saw the shift happen. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, but unmistakable. A soft unwinding of guilt, a reclaiming of space inside herself. When she opened her eyes again, she said she was ready to stop feeling responsible for his behavior. That evening, she blocked every number linked to him. She deleted the messages that once held her hostage, and as the digital ties fell away, so did the illusion of his power. With that, we turned toward the next step, the moment when the legal system would finally have its say, and we would prepare to meet it head-on. The notice arrived early in the morning, tucked beneath a stack of mail on the kitchen counter. When I opened it, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The court had reinstated the restraining order in full and added new conditions barring Loretta from any contact with Hannah. It was the first moment in weeks when I felt the system move in the direction of truth, and I watched Hannah breathe a little deeper as I handed the document to her. That relief didn't last long. By afternoon, Mark's attorney reached out with a proposal to negotiate, framing it as a chance to avoid conflict. Hannah looked at me with a steadiness I hadn't seen in her before and said she didn't owe him anything. Her refusal was quiet, but it carried the force of a door closing for good. From there, I shifted into meticulous preparation. I gathered every photograph, every medical note, every saved message and recording. I organized timelines, documented patterns, and built the narrative the court needed to see. With each piece I laid out, the anxiety inside me turned into purpose. By the time I finished, the path ahead was clear, the hearing was coming, and we were ready to face it. Walking into the courtroom felt like stepping into a space where the air itself held its breath. I sat beside Hannah, close enough to feel the tremor in her hands, while across the aisle Mark carried the same false confidence he always wore when he believed consequences wouldn't touch him. Loretta sat rigidly upright, her expression a polished mask of denial. I had seen that look before in other cases, people who believed decorum could erase truth. As the hearing began, I watched the judge sift through the documents and photographs we had prepared. Each piece of evidence landed with a quiet weight, building a picture that could no longer be dismissed. But the turning point arrived when the audio recording played. Hearing Loretta's voice, calm and approving in the background of that violent moment, shifted the room. You could feel the collective stillness as the reality of their dynamic spread across the courtroom. Mark's posture collapsed first, followed by the flush rising on Loretta's face. And then the judge spoke with a firmness that left no room for misunderstanding. The civil suit was dismissed. The restraining order was fully reinstated. Additional protections were granted, and most importantly, a criminal investigation was ordered to proceed. Beside me, Hannah exhaled in a way I had not heard in years, soft, shaky, but free. I felt something settle inside me too, a long-awaited sense of justice finally taking root. And with that ruling, our focus shifted from survival toward the deeper work of healing, which waited for us just beyond those courtroom doors. In the weeks after the hearing, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar in its quiet. Hannah began reclaiming small pieces of herself, the ones she had tucked away for so long. She spent mornings in the garden again, tending to the herbs with a gentleness that reminded me of who she had been before fear reshaped her. She reached out to old friends, went on slow walks around the neighborhood, and started therapy with a determination I hadn't seen since she was a teenager finding her place in the world. I watched her rebuild, not in grand leaps, but in steady, deliberate steps. And in that process, I realized I had my own healing to do. I had spent months bracing for impact, carrying both of us through each crisis. Learning to exhale again felt strange. Letting her stand on her own felt even stranger. But every time she chose herself, every boundary she held, every moment she allowed herself to rest, I felt a little of my own weight lift. Of course, not every day was smooth. Some mornings she woke quiet and withdrawn, and some evenings she wrestled with guilt that didn't belong to her. Healing never moves in a straight line, but each setback was followed by another step forward, and I learned to measure progress in presence, not perfection. If you've lived through something like this, or loved someone who has, I hope you know this truth. Survival is the beginning, not the end. Healing is possible. Strength returns. Light finds its way back in. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to rebuild yourself or someone you love? Share your story in the comments. I read every one. Looking back on this journey, I'm reminded that strength often grows in the spaces where we once felt most broken. Watching Hannah rebuild her life showed me that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small moments of courage, honesty, and choosing yourself again and again. And if you're carrying your own pain, I want you to know this. You deserve safety, peace, and a life where your voice is heard and honored. You are not defined by what hurt you. If this story connected with you, or if you have a journey of your own, I hope you'll share it in the comments. These conversations remind us that none of us walk through darkness alone. And if this video offered comfort or clarity, please like and share it so it can reach someone who might need it. Thank you for being here and for choosing hope with me today.